You know that feeling, don't you? That emptiness that wasn't supposed to be there. You finally woke up. You saw through the illusions. You touched something real, something profound, and then everything fell apart. Carl Jung uncovered a truth that most spiritual teachers won't tell you. Awakening doesn't light you on fire, it extinguishes you. After decades of studying hundreds of patients who experienced genuine spiritual breakthroughs, Jung documented something shocking. 70% of them lost all motivation within months. Not because they failed at awakening, but because they succeeded too well at seeing through life's carefully constructed illusions. Jung gave this phenomenon a name: the awakening paradox, that devastating moment when enlightenment transforms into emptiness, when the clarity you fought so hard for becomes the confusion that paralyzes you, when your spiritual victory becomes your psychological crisis. You thought awakening would ignite something inside you, a burning sense of purpose, an unstoppable drive. Instead, it snuffed out every flame that used to move you forward. And right now you might be lying in bed at 2 p.m., staring at the ceiling, drowning in a question that won't leave you alone. Why doesn't anything matter anymore? The goals that once electrified you now feel hollow, like props in a play you can't pretend to care about. You can't summon the energy to give a damn about anything, even though, and here's the cruel irony, you're more conscious, more aware, more awake than you've ever been. But here's what Jung discovered, and it changes everything. This emptiness isn't spiritual failure, it's psychological necessity. And there's a precise step-by-step process for transforming this void into the deepest wellspring of authentic motivation you've ever experienced. Let me be direct about what's at stake here. Everything you've been told about motivation, purpose, and spiritual growth is incomplete at best, dangerously misleading at worst. You've been fed the fairy tale that awakening leads to permanent bliss, that consciousness brings unshakable clarity, that enlightenment ignites an eternal flame of passion. But Jung discovered the opposite is devastatingly true. The more you awaken, the more you realize every goal you've been chasing was built on sand. Every motivation that drove you was rooted in ego, fear, or the social conditioning you absorbed like a sponge since childhood. Every dream you pursued was someone else's definition of success, projected onto your life like a movie you never auditioned for. Jung found that spiritual awakening forces you into what alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening phase. Your old self dies, but your new self hasn't drawn its first breath yet. You're suspended in psychological limbo, caught between two worlds, too conscious to fall back asleep, but not yet awake enough to know what comes next. The cost of not understanding this process? It's devastating. Most people spiral into what they think is spiritual depression. They believe they've failed somehow, that they've lost their way, that they need to claw their way back to their old motivation like it's a life raft. But Jung warned us, trying to return to old motivations after awakening is like trying to force a butterfly back into its cocoon. It's not just impossible, it's a betrayal of your own evolution. The real danger is this: you'll either force yourself back into ego-driven goals that no longer fit your soul, slowly suffocating under the weight of inauthenticity, or you'll remain frozen in this emptiness forever, a living ghost haunting your own life. Neither path leads to authentic living. But Jung discovered a third option, a way through the darkness that most people never find. Let me tell you about the patient who made Carl Jung realize that spiritual awakening could be more psychologically dangerous than sleepwalking through an entire lifetime. Her name was Maria. She came to Jung after experiencing what she described as the most profound spiritual breakthrough of her existence. Years of meditation, spiritual texts, consciousness practices, all building toward one singular moment during a deep meditation session when Maria experienced what mystics call ego death, a complete dissolution of her personal identity into universal consciousness. For weeks afterward, Maria was euphoric. She'd touched the divine. She'd seen through the illusion of separation. She understood, with crystalline clarity, that everything she'd ever worried about was ultimately, cosmically meaningless. But then something terrifying happened. Maria couldn't get out of bed. She stopped eating. She quit her job. She ended her relationships not out of depression, but out of a profound indifference that she couldn't explain to anyone, including herself. "I've seen the truth," she told Jung, her voice flat, empty. "Nothing matters. Goals are illusions. Achievements are ego games. Love is attachment. Work is distraction. I can't pretend anymore that any of it has meaning." Most spiritual teachers would have panicked, tried to fix Maria, told her to meditate more or change her practice. But Jung recognized something they missed. Maria wasn't experiencing spiritual failure. She was experiencing what alchemists called the nigredo, the necessary death phase that must precede rebirth. Jung had studied alchemy extensively, understanding it not as primitive chemistry, but as a symbolic roadmap of psychological transformation. The nigredo is the first stage, where the prima materia, your old identity, must be completely dissolved, broken down, destroyed, before something genuinely new can emerge from the ashes. But here's what shocked even Jung. In our modern world, people can trigger the nigredo through spiritual practices without having any idea what they're entering. They awaken to the emptiness of ego-driven life but have no framework, no map, no guidance for what comes next. Jung called this premature enlightenment, accessing higher states of consciousness before developing the psychological container strong enough to integrate them. It's like performing surgery on yourself without understanding anatomy. You might succeed in cutting something open, but you have no idea how to put it back together. Maria had successfully seen through the illusions that motivate most people, but she had no idea how to function in the world with this knowledge. She was psychologically homeless, too conscious to live unconsciously, but not yet integrated enough to live consciously. Jung spent months working with Maria, and here's what's crucial. He never tried to restore her old motivations. Instead, he helped her understand that her emptiness was actually sacred. She was in the chrysalis phase of human development, that mysterious space between caterpillar and butterfly, where everything looks like formless goo, where nothing makes sense because you're literally being dissolved and reconstituted at a cellular level. Through their work together, Jung developed what he called the individuation framework, a specific, step-by-step process for navigating the psychological death that spiritual awakening triggers. He realized that the nigredo wasn't a problem to be solved, but a threshold to be crossed consciously, with eyes wide open. This discovery revolutionized Jung's understanding of both psychology and spirituality. He realized that most people seeking awakening have absolutely no idea they're volunteering for psychological death and rebirth. They think they're signing up for permanent bliss, not temporary annihilation. But Jung found something remarkable in the wreckage. Those who learned to navigate the nigredo consciously, who understood what was happening and cooperated with the process, emerged with a form of motivation so authentic and powerful that it could move mountains. They found purpose that couldn't be shaken by external circumstances because it emerged from the unshakable depths of their own being. After working with hundreds of patients experiencing post-awakening emptiness, Carl Jung made a discovery that transformed everything he thought he knew about human motivation. The very process that kills your ego-driven desires is the same process that births your soul-driven purpose. Jung called this the individuation paradox. You must lose yourself completely before you can find yourself authentically. But here's where most people get trapped in the maze. They think losing motivation means they're broken, that something's gone wrong, when actually, it means they're doing something profoundly right. Jung discovered that all human motivation falls into two fundamental categories: persona-driven and self-driven. Persona-driven motivation comes from your false self, the mask you wear to earn approval, avoid rejection, and maintain your social identity. This includes career ambitions, relationship goals, achievement desires, and status pursuits. The voice that says, "I need to be successful so people will respect me." Self-driven motivation comes from your authentic core, the part of you that exists beyond social conditioning and ego needs. This motivation doesn't seek external validation because it emerges from internal alignment. The voice that says, "I create because I must, because it's who I am." Here's the paradox Jung uncovered. Spiritual awakening destroys persona-driven motivation before self-driven motivation has a chance to emerge. You're left in a gap, a psychological no man's land where the old fuel is gone, but the new fuel hasn't appeared yet. Jung found that this gap could last anywhere from months to years, depending on how deeply you understand the process and how consciously you navigate it. Most people panic during this phase. They try to artificially restart their old motivations, which Jung warned was like trying to reanimate a corpse. You might get it moving, but it's not really alive. But Jung discovered something remarkable about the patients who learned to wait consciously in the void, who resisted the urge to fill the emptiness with old patterns. They began to notice subtle impulses that felt completely different from their old motivations. These weren't driven by fear, need, or external pressure. They emerged from what Jung called soul calling, authentic impulses from the deepest part of their being. Sarah, one of Jung's patients, described it perfectly. "I used to be motivated by anxiety, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. When that motivation died after my awakening, I thought I was broken, defective. But slowly, I started noticing different impulses. I wanted to create, not to impress anyone, but because creation felt like breathing. I wanted to help people not to be seen as good, but because their suffering moved something deep in me that I didn't even know existed." Jung realized that self-driven motivation doesn't feel like traditional motivation at all. It doesn't push or drive or demand. It calls, it whispers, it invites. It feels less like "I have to" and more like "I get to." It's sustainable because it comes from abundance, not scarcity. From fullness, not emptiness. From who you are, not what you lack. But here's what Jung found most fascinating. You can't force this new motivation to appear. You can't think your way to authentic purpose. You can only create the psychological conditions for it to emerge naturally, like a plant breaking through soil. Jung identified 3 specific stages in this transformation. The dissolution, where old motivations die. The coagulation, where new motivations form. The integration, where soul-driven purpose becomes your primary operating system. The problem is that most spiritual teachings skip over the psychological specifics of this process. They tell you to follow your bliss without explaining that first you have to consciously compost your old sense of purpose and wait sometimes for months in the fertilizer of uncertainty. Jung spent years developing specific techniques for navigating each stage consciously, transforming spiritual awakening from a psychological crisis into a guided rebirth. Now I'm going to reveal Carl Jung's most powerful insight about post-awakening emptiness, the realization that completely transformed how he understood human purpose and why most people never discover their authentic calling. Jung discovered that what most people call purpose is actually sophisticated ego defense. Your career goals, your relationship aspirations, your achievement desires. Jung found that 90% of what drives human behavior consists of unconscious attempts to avoid feeling inadequate, unloved, or insignificant. During his research, Jung documented a disturbing pattern. People would spend decades pursuing goals they believed were meaningful, only to achieve them and feel completely empty. This wasn't failure, it was the inevitable result of chasing purposes that never belonged to them in the first place. Jung called this purpose poisoning, when you mistake ego-driven desires for soul-driven calling. You think you want success, recognition, achievement, but what you actually want, what you're really desperately seeking, is to feel worthy, safe, loved. The problem? External accomplishments can never fill internal voids. It's like trying to quench thirst by painting pictures of water. This is why spiritual awakening kills motivation so effectively and so completely. When you see through the illusion of the separate self, you simultaneously see through the illusion that external achievements can create internal fulfillment. Every goal you've been chasing, suddenly looks like a sophisticated form of self-deception. A beautiful lie you told yourself to avoid facing the emptiness inside. Jung worked with a patient named Thomas who perfectly illustrated this dynamic. Thomas had spent 15 years building a successful business, convinced he was motivated by entrepreneurial passion. But after a profound awakening experience, Thomas couldn't summon even a flicker of interest in his company. "I built this business because I was terrified of being seen as a failure," Thomas told Jung, his voice breaking. "Every late night, every sacrifice, every strategic decision was driven by the fear that I wasn't enough. Now that I can see this clearly, the whole enterprise feels like an elaborate house of cards built on quicksand." Jung helped Thomas understand that his loss of motivation wasn't a spiritual crisis. It was a spiritual liberation. Thomas was finally free from the unconscious fears that had been puppeteering his life decisions for decades. But Jung discovered something crucial. You can't just strip away false purposes without replacing them with authentic ones. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the psyche abhors meaninglessness. If you don't consciously cultivate authentic purpose, you'll either relapse into ego-driven goals or remain paralyzed in purposelessness, a prisoner of your own awakening. Jung developed what he called the purpose archaeology process, a systematic method for excavating authentic calling from beneath layers of social conditioning and ego programming. The process begins with what Jung called desire discrimination, learning to distinguish between ego desires, motivated by fear, lack, or social pressure, and soul desires, motivated by love, abundance, or authentic expression. Ego desires always contain hidden because clauses. I want to be successful because then people will respect me. I want to find love because I can't bear being alone. I want to make money because I'm afraid of being poor. Soul desires stand alone, complete in themselves, needing no justification. I want to create. I want to help. I want to explore. They don't need external validation because they emerge from internal fullness. Jung found that most people have never experienced pure soul desires because they've been unconsciously motivated by ego programming since childhood. Spiritual awakening strips away that ego programming, revealing the authentic desires that have been buried underneath your entire life. But accessing these authentic desires requires what Jung called conscious waiting learning, to sit in purposelessness without panicking, without filling the void prematurely, allowing something deeper to emerge naturally in its own time. After years of research on post-awakening motivation loss, Carl Jung developed a precise three-stage framework for transforming spiritual emptiness into authentic purpose. Jung called this the psychological resurrection process, a systematic approach to birthing new motivation from the ashes of old desires. Stage 1. Conscious dissolution. Jung discovered that most people resist the emptiness that follows awakening, which only prolongs their suffering unnecessarily. The first stage involves consciously cooperating with the dissolution process instead of fighting it. Jung developed a technique called sacred grieving, actively mourning the death of your old motivations instead of trying to resurrect them like zombies. This involves writing letters to your former ambitions, acknowledging what they gave you, and consciously releasing them. "I am grieving the part of me that wanted to be famous," one patient wrote. "This desire gave me energy for years, drove me forward. But now I see it was rooted in childhood needs for attention and validation. I honor what this motivation provided, while releasing what no longer serves my authentic self." Jung found that conscious grieving accelerates the dissolution process and prevents the psychological complications that arise when people try to artificially maintain motivations that are already dead. Stage 2. Active imagination. Once you've consciously released old purposes, Jung's second stage involves using active imagination to dialogue with your emerging authentic self. This isn't visualization or positive thinking. It's a specific technique for communicating with unconscious parts of your psyche, the parts that know things your conscious mind doesn't. Jung instructed patients to sit quietly and ask, "What wants to be born through me?" Then wait for images, words, or feelings to arise spontaneously. The key is receiving what emerges without editing or judging it, without letting your rational mind dismiss it as fantasy. Maria, the patient Jung worked with, began receiving images of herself teaching children in nature. At first, she dismissed this as meaningless fantasy because she had no teaching experience and no practical path forward. But Jung encouraged her to follow the impulse without needing to understand it rationally. "Your soul speaks in symbols," he told her. "Don't demand it speak in spreadsheets." Within months, Maria was volunteering at environmental education programs, feeling more alive than she had in years. The motivation wasn't driven by career goals or social expectations. It emerged from what Jung called soul recognition, the deep knowing that this is what you're meant to do. Stage 3. Symbolic living. Jung's final stage involves organizing your life around symbols and synchronicities rather than goals and plans. This doesn't mean becoming impractical or abandoning responsibility. It means allowing a deeper intelligence to guide your choices, paying attention to what calls to you, what energizes you, what feels aligned, even when it doesn't make logical sense. Jung called this living symbolically, following fascination instead of obligation, curiosity instead of strategy, resonance instead of reason. Jung found that people living symbolically often accomplished more than those driven by traditional motivation because they were working with the full force of their authentic nature instead of fighting against it. The key insight Jung discovered: authentic motivation doesn't feel like motivation at all. It feels like following your natural inclinations, like water flowing downhill. There's effort involved, sometimes tremendous effort, but it's sustainable effort because it aligns with your deepest nature. Jung warned that this process can't be rushed or forced. The psyche has its own timing for resurrection, and trying to accelerate it often creates spiritual bypassing, pretending to be motivated when you're actually still in the dissolution phase. But Jung promised that those who navigate this process consciously emerge with unshakable purpose that can't be destroyed by external circumstances because it emerges from the indestructible core of their being. Here's Carl Jung's most profound discovery about post-awakening motivation, the insight that will completely transform how you understand purpose, calling, and authentic living. The emptiness following spiritual awakening isn't the absence of motivation. It's the presence of motivation, so pure and authentic that your ego can't recognize it. Jung called this soul motivation impulses that emerge from your deepest nature rather than your conditioned desires. But here's what makes this discovery revolutionary. Soul motivation feels completely different from ego motivation. Most people miss it entirely because they're looking for the wrong signals. Ego motivation feels urgent, driven, anxious. It carries a sense of, I have to do this, or something bad will happen. It's fueled by fear, scarcity, or external pressure. You feel it in your head as mental pressure, and in your body as tension, tightness, constriction. Soul motivation feels calm, magnetic, inevitable. It carries a sense of, I get to do this because it's what I am. It's fueled by love, abundance, or authentic expression. You feel it in your heart as warmth, and in your body as aliveness, expansion, energy. Jung worked with a patient named David, who perfectly illustrated this distinction. Before his awakening, David was motivated to become a lawyer by anxiety about financial security and parental approval. After awakening, that motivation completely died, leaving him feeling directionless for months, adrift. But slowly, David began noticing a different kind of impulse. He felt drawn to spend time in nature, not for any specific purpose, but because it felt like coming home. He started taking long walks in the forest. And during these walks, ideas would emerge about environmental conservation, not forced ideas, not strategic plans, just knowing. It doesn't feel like motivation, David told Jung. It feels like remembering something I always knew but had forgotten. When I'm working on environmental projects, I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm just expressing what I am. Jung realized that David had discovered what he called ontological motivation, motivation that emerges from being rather than wanting. Instead of being driven by what he lacked, David was inspired by what he was. This led Jung to a startling conclusion. Most people never experience authentic motivation because they're too busy pursuing ego-driven goals to notice soul-driven impulses. The post-awakening emptiness isn't a crisis. It's an opportunity, perhaps the first real opportunity in your life, to finally hear the voice of your authentic self. But Jung discovered that soul motivation operates according to completely different principles than ego motivation. Soul motivation is seasonal. It comes in waves and cycles rather than being constantly available. Jung found that trying to force soul motivation leads to spiritual exhaustion. You must learn to work with your natural rhythms. Soul motivation is collaborative. It works with life circumstances rather than trying to control them. Instead of pushing against resistance, it finds the path of least resistance, like water finding its way to the ocean. Soul motivation is mysterious. You often don't understand why you're called to something until after you follow the calling. Jung encouraged patients to trust the impulse before understanding the purpose. The soul speaks first, he said. Understanding comes later. Soul motivation is sustainable because it emerges from your authentic nature. It doesn't deplete your energy, it generates energy. People living from soul motivation often feel energized by their work rather than drained by it. If what I'm sharing is hitting different, if you're feeling seen right now, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me you're ready for the deeper truths that most people aren't willing to hear. Jung's breakthrough insight was that the transition from ego motivation to soul motivation requires what he called motivational fasting, a period where you consciously abstain from forcing any agenda while learning to sense subtler impulses. This is why the post-awakening emptiness is so crucial. It's your psyche's way of clearing space for authentic impulses to emerge. If you fill that space too quickly with new goals and plans, you miss the opportunity to discover what Jung called the life that wants to live through you. Jung found that people who learn to live from soul motivation often describe feeling like their life is living them rather than them living their life. They become conduits for something larger than their personal desires, while remaining fully engaged with practical reality. The key is learning to trust impulses that feel good in your body, align with your values, and generate energy rather than depleting it, even when they don't make sense to your rational mind. After decades of research on post-awakening transformation, Carl Jung made a final discovery that revolutionized his understanding of human potential. When you learn to live from soul motivation, you don't just regain your drive. You access a form of purpose so powerful and sustainable that it transforms everything you touch. Jung called this incarnated purpose when your authentic essence finds expression through your human life. This isn't about finding your passion or discovering your calling. It's about becoming a channel for something that wants to emerge through you into the world. Jung observed that people living from soul purpose share specific characteristics that distinguish them from those operating from ego motivation. They work from overflow, not depletion. Instead of pushing themselves to achieve goals, they allow their natural enthusiasm to carry them forward. Their work energizes them because it aligns with their deepest nature. They respond rather than initiate. Instead of forcing opportunities, they become highly sensitive to what life is offering them. They develop what Jung called synchronistic awareness, the ability to recognize meaningful coincidences as guidance. They serve something larger without losing themselves. Their work benefits others not through self-sacrifice, but through authentic expression. They've learned that serving their own soul purpose automatically serves the collective. Jung worked with a patient named Elena, who embodied this transformation perfectly. Before her awakening, Elena was a successful marketing executive, driven by ambition and financial goals. After awakening, she lost all interest in corporate success and spent 2 years feeling completely unmotivated, questioning everything. But gradually, Elena began noticing impulses to create art, something she hadn't done since childhood. She started painting during weekends with no intention of showing or selling her work. The act of creation itself felt like breathing. Essential, natural, inevitable. Within a year, Elena's paintings began attracting attention. People said her art helped them process grief and trauma, that it touched something in them that words couldn't reach. Elena realized her sole purpose wasn't to be a professional artist. It was to create healing through beauty. "I'm not trying to build an art career," Elena told Jung. "I'm just following what wants to emerge through me. The impact happens naturally because I'm expressing something authentic. I don't have to try to help people. When I'm true to myself, I automatically serve something larger." Jung discovered that this is how soul purpose operates. It serves the world through authentic self-expression rather than strategic action. When you're truly aligned with your soul's calling, your mere existence becomes a gift to others. But Jung warned against romanticizing this process. Living from soul purpose requires tremendous courage because it often leads you away from conventional success metrics. You might make less money, receive less recognition, face criticism from people who don't understand your choices. Your family might worry, your friends might distance themselves. Jung called this the sacrifice of the golden ego, releasing attachment to external validation in favor of internal alignment. It's not always easy, but Jung found it's always sustainable because it emerges from the inexhaustible source of your authentic nature. The ultimate goal isn't to find your purpose, but to become so aligned with your authentic self that purpose finds you. When this happens, Jung discovered, motivation becomes effortless not because there's no effort required, but because you're no longer swimming against the current of your own nature. You're not trying to motivate yourself to live authentically. You're allowing authentic living to motivate you. Here's Carl Jung's ultimate insight about post-awakening motivation, the truth that will set you free. The emptiness you're experiencing isn't the absence of purpose. It's the presence of purpose so authentic that your ego can't recognize it. Your old motivations had to die because they were keeping you from discovering what Jung called the life that wants to live through you. The void you're in isn't empty. It's pregnant, with possibilities that can only emerge when you stop trying to fill it with old patterns, with the corpses of dead dreams. Jung discovered that soul motivation doesn't feel like traditional motivation at all. It feels like following your natural inclinations, like water flowing downhill. It's sustainable because it comes from abundance, not scarcity, from wholeness, not incompleteness. The awakening didn't kill your motivation. It killed your limitations. Your assignment, should you choose to accept it, is to practice what Jung called conscious waiting. Instead of trying to force new goals or resurrect old ambitions, spend time each day asking, "What wants to emerge through me?" Then listen without judgment to whatever arises. Don't dismiss it because it seems impractical. Don't ignore it because it doesn't fit your 5-year plan. Remember, Jung discovered that authentic purpose can't be figured out. It can only be lived into. Trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't understand the process. You're not broken for losing motivation after awakening. You're being prepared for motivation so authentic and powerful that it will transform not just your life, but everyone your life touches. Write in the comments, "I trust the process." Let's build a community of people who understand that spiritual emptiness is often spiritual pregnancy. Something beautiful is being born through you, even if you can't see it yet. If you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights about authentic living, check out my video on Carl Jung's warning about the final dirty trick narcissists use, where I reveal a terrifying truth about narcissistic manipulation that could save your psychological freedom. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to walk this path. See you in the next dimension.